Hogwarts Legacy for under $9 is honestly hard to process. We are talking about a massive, fully realized wizarding school where you can ignore the main plot entirely just to breed magical beasts or customize a personal sanctuary. The combat has a rhythmic flow that gets surprisingly punishing on higher difficulties. Sure, the inventory management gets a bit tedious later on, but for $8.99, the sheer scale of the castle alone justifies the purchase. Grabbing a full AAA title for the price of a decent sandwich is the exact kind of deal that defines a summer sale. Enshrouded takes the survival formula and gives you entirely voxel-based terrain to manipulate. Want a basement? Grab a pickaxe and literally carve one out of the mountain. It drops down to around $24 right now, which is incredibly generous considering the developer keeps pushing out massive content updates. The fog mechanic actively punishes greed, forcing you to calculate exactly how long you can survive in the corruption before scrambling back to safety. It is very easy to lose entire weekends just tweaking the roof of your custom fortress. Seeing Diablo IV hit $30 makes pulling the trigger a lot easier if you've been holding out. The campaign alone delivers that heavy, cinematic, grimdark fantasy perfectly, and the seasonal content has finally found its footing. Smashing a dozen demons into walls with a single swing never really loses its appeal. The skill tree can feel slightly restrictive early on, but once you hit the endgame Paragon boards, the build math gets wonderfully out of hand. For half price, jumping into the loot grind makes total sense. Barony is sitting at $1.99, which is basically free. This is a brutally unforgiving first-person dungeon crawler that actively wants you dead, and laughing at your friends dying to obvious boulder traps is half the fun. You will get crushed, burned, and swarmed by skeletons while trying to identify cursed items. It has that glorious old-school jank that somehow makes the whole experience better. Grabbing a 4-player co-op meat grinder for under $2 is the easiest recommendation on this entire list. Clair Obscur Expedition 33, sitting at $40, is tempting for anyone exhausted by traditional turn-based combat. The mechanic where you actively dodge and parry enemy attacks during a turn-based fight keeps you completely engaged. You cannot just mash the attack button and look at your phone. The art direction leans heavily into this bizarre, almost haunting surrealism that makes every boss encounter feel genuinely intimidating. If you want a combat system that demands actual reflexes instead of just spreadsheet optimization, this is where your budget belongs. Final Fantasy VII Remake INTERGRADE for $14 feels like a typo. You're getting a gorgeous, ridiculously polished reimagining of Midgar with a combat system that perfectly balances tactical pausing and chaotic action. Switching characters to juggle stagger bars creates this incredibly satisfying combat loop. The pacing drags slightly during a few side quests, but the sheer spectacle of the boss fights easily makes up for it. Dropping a few bucks for 40+ hours of premium cinematic RPG action is a complete steal. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt at $4 is the ultimate obligatory sale purchase. If somehow you haven't played this yet, paying $4 for a world where side quests have better writing than most Hollywood movies is absurd. Decisions you make in some random swamp will unexpectedly ruin a character's life 30 hours later. The combat can feel a little floaty by modern standards, but you are buying this to get hopelessly lost in the politics and monster hunting contracts. Skip your morning coffee and buy a masterpiece instead. Elden Ring Nightreign drops to $30, making it the perfect time to get completely destroyed by From Software all over again. The way this game uses the day-night cycle to completely alter enemy patrols and boss spawns forces you to constantly rethink your navigation. Sometimes you just stumble into a horrifying abomination entirely by accident because the sun went down. The camera still struggles in tight corners during massive boss fights, but the feeling of finally overcoming a wall after 50 failed attempts remains unmatched. Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon brings that classic Skyrim exploration into a terrifying, decaying Arthurian world, and right now it costs about $27. The atmosphere is incredibly oppressive, and the magic system lets you combine spells in ways that usually end up causing massive collateral damage. It definitely has a bit of Euro jank, and some animations are stiff, but the sheer freedom to build weird, broken character combinations is fantastic. If you want a bleak, deeply atmospheric atmospheric open world that doesn't hold your hand, this fits the bill perfectly. Metaphor ReFantazio dropping under $28 is massive for anyone who loves deep, calendar-based JRPGs. The archetype class system lets you completely break the game if you spend enough time experimenting with party compositions. Erasing low-level enemies directly in the overworld without engaging in full turn-based combat saves so much tedious grinding. The sheer amount of style practically bleeds off the screen during every single menu transition. Grabbing a massive 80-hour epic at a 60% discount is exactly how you maximize a Steam sale budget. Trails in the Sky First Chapter at $30 is your entry point into the most absurdly detailed world building in gaming history. Every single NPC has their own unfolding storyline that updates after major events, making the towns feel incredibly alive. The orbment system requires a lot of tinkering to unlock specific magic abilities, and while the pacing is notoriously a slow burn, the character development is phenomenal. Investing in this now sets you up for a narrative payoff that players are still talking about over a decade later. The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion Remastered hits $25, and honestly, the nostalgia alone is lethal. Finally experiencing the radiant AI system without the game constantly crashing is a blessing. Watching NPCs try to awkwardly live their lives, eat apples, and occasionally murder each other over a piece of bread is still incredibly entertaining. The leveling system is definitely still easily abusable, but spellcrafting remains completely broken in the best way possible. Recreating spells that let you jump over entire cities has never looked so crisp. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for $20 is ridiculously cheap for the sheer volume of content packed inside. The synergy abilities between characters completely change how you approach tough fights, rewarding you for swapping party members constantly. Sometimes you get completely sidetracked by a deep, oddly complex card game instead of saving the planet. Yes, there are entirely too many minigames, and a few of them are clunky, but the open-world exploration paired with that unbelievable soundtrack makes $20 feel like outright theft. The Outer Worlds 2, sitting at $25 right now, delivers that perfect, sarcastic corporate dystopia. The companion dialogue is incredibly sharp, and having them interrupt your conversations to insult the person you're talking to never gets old. The gunplay is tight, though the inventory management can definitely get a bit overwhelming when you're hoarding 5 different types of space noodles. If you want a hyper-focused, story-driven shooter where you can talk your way out of almost any boss fight, this is a very smart purchase. Lies of P at $30 gives you some of the tightest parry mechanics outside of a From Software title. The weapon assembly system lets you snot a massive buzzsaw onto the hilt of a rapier, totally changing the attack speed and scaling. Boss fights demand utter perfection, heavily punishing anyone who tries to dodge roll instead of standing their ground and deflecting. The linear level design actually feels refreshing, keeping you constantly moving forward into the next nightmare. It is easily one of the best action RPGs on the market today. Solo leveling Arise Overdrive down to $24 is fantastic if you want pure, aggressive power fantasy. The moment you start extracting shadows from defeated bosses and summoning them to fight alongside you, the screen just explodes with absolute chaos. The dodge windows are incredibly tight, triggering massive slow-motion counterattacks. The UI can feel a little cluttered with numbers and cooldowns, but slicing through 100 enemies in 3 seconds completely justifies it. Picking this up on a discount guarantees you an aggressively fast-paced combat loop. Mass Effect Legendary Edition under $5 is the kind of deal that makes you double-check your screen. You get 3 massive interconnected RPGs where your choices genuinely carry over from game to game. Losing a squad mate in the second game because you made a bad tactical call will haunt your playthrough all the way to the end of the trilogy. The Mako driving sections in the first game are still a bouncy nightmare, but experiencing this entire sci-fi epic for the cost of a coffee is completely ridiculous. Avowed dropping to $30 offers a dense, highly reactive world where your elemental magic interact directly with the environment. Freezing a puddle of water to trap enemies before shattering them with a hammer feels incredibly tactical.
The combat requires serious crowd control rather than just hacking away at health bars. While the facial animations occasionally look a bit stiff, the sheer variety of ways to resolve quests, whether through violence, stealth, or pure charisma, makes every playthrough distinctly your own. Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader at $20 is a massive win for hardcore CRPG fans. Operating as a merchant prince with a literal void ship full of expendable crew members gives you an insane amount of political power. The combat rules are extremely dense, requiring you to understand cover mechanics and line of sight heavily, which can definitely intimidate newer players. But ordering a tactical orbital strike on a cultist compound because someone insulted your hat perfectly captures that ruthless 40K fantasy. Lords of the Fallen under $10 absolutely deserves a spot in your cart. The dual world mechanic forces you to shine your magical lantern to peek into a terrifying parallel dimension just to cross broken bridges or find hidden paths. Getting dragged into the dead world against your will completely spikes your adrenaline. Enemy placement can feel a bit cheap in certain late-game areas, but the sheer visual design